Applying actions is pretty straightforward, but creating them has some pitfalls. And unfortunately, if you don't know what they are in advance, then they'll get you later. For example, remember how I said that you can record lasso selections and things? So it's possible to like draw a square. Notice that if your settings are default, you have these little width and height things popping up. It's claiming that my width is 51 inches and my height's 65 inches. Well, that's just because of whatever insane settings this particular image is set to. So if I went to image size, we could see that it's a 72 resolution and some insane number of inches, but it's only a few thousand pixels high and tall. It's actually not that bad if we were to be on, turn off resample here. If we were to be on like 300 pixels per inch, you see it's a 13 by 16 inch document. But because it's not set to that, we have these huge number of inches, which means if you open up a normal file and you made and you played a action that you'd recorded that has like a 50 by 50 inch selection, it's going to fly off and have all kinds of issues. So how do you prevent that? Well, what you really need is for actions to record things according to a percentage and not a hard size. And the way you do that is through the ruler menu. There's another way, but the easiest way is through the rulers. Just going to press Control R to bring up in rulers. I want to say that's the same thing as view rulers. Yep, view rulers. Once you have the rulers open, you can right click on the ruler, not in this empty space, but right click on the ruler, either of these ruler bars. Just do it at the top. You'll see it's set to inches. And at the very bottom, you have percent. Percent means that you're just dragging across a certain percentage of the image. So for example, now we're going from about 90% to 90% of the image. Great. That's really more what you want to do when you're recording an action. The issue is that the actions window panel here, the actions panel, doesn't have these size settings. And you can do this fly out and start looking over these. You've got button modes and new actions and duplicates and plays and all these ghosted stuff and playback options. You have something called tool recording. I'll show you that in a bit. You can clear the actions and reset them. You have all kinds of pre-saved actions. You can close the tab and you can close groups of the tab, but it doesn't have the sizes that you're recording. And the reason is that it's just running it straight off the ruler. Much like the Magic Wand's tolerance option is used by other wand-like commands, which is insane and aggravating. This should just appear wherever it's needed. The actions is working off of the ruler settings. So in order to do that, just set the ruler to whatever you need. I'm going to leave the ruler open as a reminder that I need to reset it later. So once you have that, the next thing people normally make a mistake is just to press record. You don't want to do that because you'll notice that this action set, and again, everything else would be a folder or a group, but in actions, they call it a set, has a name already called default actions. So immediately you realize you probably want your own custom actions. Sure enough, there's a little folder here, which is create a new set. I'll click that, have the ability to name this. I will call this custom actions. And notice now I have this tiny folder, which is called a set, called custom actions. From here, I can create new actions inside of it. And I can also export sets of actions out and import them into other versions of Photoshop or even the same one. So if, for example, I wanted to reinstall this version of Photoshop or install a new version of Photoshop, or I wanted to go to work with an action I'd painstakingly created, I can export the action set. And you do that by clicking on the action, going to the flyout menu, and then choosing export, I believe they called it. Let's see if they've changed the name. Yes, it's now called Save Actions. Lovely. So tell it Save Actions, and then that will allow you to save it as a .atn file. That's just an action file. You can put it wherever you want. And then later, I'm just going to cancel that. You go to the flyout and you load actions, and that will let you bring them back in. Now, heads up on this, even to this very version of Photoshop, you cannot export a single action, which is really what most people want to do most of the time. If you go to Save Action, you notice that it suddenly blanked out. It wants to do an action set. The workaround Adobe recommends is that you simply create a new action, such as custom actions, or in this case, I will create a new one and call it export action. Single action. Boom. Notice it has function key. Oh, I pressed new action, didn't I? Cancel. I'll talk about that later. Press that one. Export custom action. So we have a single action set with nothing in it. I'm just going to drag this gradient map to export custom actions. Now I can click right up on export custom actions, and I can save this one. And I would just name it gradient map. We'll talk about those later when we go over how color works inside of Photoshop more in depth when we color an image. Don't worry about that for now. And then when I'm done with it, just drag it back up to where it belongs. Now, what if I had wanted to keep that? Well, hold down the Alt key and drag it, and it should duplicate to wherever you're dragging it. That's the Option key on Macintoshes. You can also throw away extras. So I've got this copy. I could chuck it. I can throw away entire action sets. Just throw that away right to the garbage can. If you accidentally click the garbage can, it will ask you if you want to delete it prior to doing it, which is nice. All right, so we've got these custom actions. We have the ability to load and reset the actions and replace the actions and save the actions. So we can actually override these with other things if we so chose. We also have a bunch of pre-recorded ones from the Adobe engineers. And remember, some of them may be broken, and I'll explain how you can fix those later. But they're still great to look at to see how highly paid Adobe software engineers work with Photoshop. It's really cool. So we have our own custom action now. Now it's safe to record. We won't accidentally mix our thing in with the default action, which then could accidentally be reset later with like reset actions. That would be bad. So we have our custom action. Our custom action set. Let me rename that by double clicking. Cool. Now we're going to create a custom action. I'm just going to press this new action button, which is create new action. And now it's going to say some stuff here. Name your action. Which set do you want it in? I only have 2 right now. What function key? Heads up, if you press the function key and you've tied it to this, then it will override anything else the function key is tied to and will run that action. This is horrible. Never do this. The reason is actually pretty straightforward. Let's say that we've built a function such as that gradient map function or the vignette effect or something. You would build a new function and just call it, or a new function. You build a new action and call it function key 2. And whoops, I forgot to set it. That's okay. If you double click on these, you can get back to the action options. You can also click on the flyout menu and you can go to the action options somewhere. Oh, maybe not in this version. In some versions, you can right click here, or you can click here on the flyout menu and edit the action options, which is interesting that it does not have it there. All right, well, that's aggravating. Just double click it and we'll bring it up. I'm going to temporarily set function key 2. And I'll say that you have to do control function key 2, whatever. So doing that will run it. Now, check this out. I can record things on my action. And that includes playing back other actions. So I could go to wood frame and press play. And it'll say image size must blah, blah, blah. Continue. And stop. Now, what does this function do? This action? The function key 2 action, all it does is play back another action, but it's tied to control F2. So if I were to throw away all of this junk and press control F2, you see that it just plays it, but with an action, with a function key, which is great. So that means that you never actually have to have a function key on anything. You can either double click it later and set it, or do what I do and just make like a function key action and then just play an action inside of there. That's all. That's how I handle it. All right, so that's just, I'm going to throw that away. That's just a little thing that I do because I think that applying function keys to these is generally a bad idea. It's a good way to mess up your workflow later, but sometimes you need it, so just temporarily do it. All right, I'm just going to pop back to the original version of this by rolling back in history, throw away all those extra snapshots that were created, and we're back to where we started. Going to collapse that. We have our custom action set. All right, so now things are starting to make a little more sense. Press record, do some stuff, it records it. You can even record other actions. Cool, so let's do something maybe a little more interesting. Let us apply some changes, and we'll notice some of the flaws. So I'll start recording. I'll start with a new action. Boom. Call it action 1. Why not? With no function key. So it automatically starts recording. You can stop it first if you want to do something. That's fine. And then you start doing things, and you remember something. You don't want to work on an original file when you're recording actions. You actually want to do a new temporary snapshot of it. So let me show you that real quick. Under the history, you'll see that you've got this little button right here, create new document from current state. Do that. Now we have a duplicate state. So the original is still somewhere doing its own thing. But if I try to close this, it'll say save changes to Adobe Photoshop document, something or another. Well, the reason it's saying that is this is a new document altogether. So I could do whatever I want while building an action, and I never endanger another file. So everything's good. Now, the cool thing about the create new document from current state is that it will have all the layers and everything brought over with it. It's just wonderful. So now that we've done that, we'll go down to our action and start recording. I'm going to press record. And now let's say I do something like duplicate this layer. So it says duplicate current layer. Cool, straightforward enough. Now let's say that I lighten the color. Well, it set the current layer to a different color. Well, that's neat. Let's say I duplicate another one. And then I do like a color burn. And I think that looks bad, so I go overlay. Oops, now I've got 2 of those in. All right, hold on. So then I'd press stop. I'd go over, and I'd delete, and I'd delete the selection, and then I could keep recording. So then I go, oh, wait, was I hard mix? And then it's messed up again. So notice that it keeps recording each one of these little changes, and I don't really want to do that. What I want is to see how it will look and then apply it. So I could stop it, goof around with it for a minute, and go back. But the better way to do it is to work smartly. Work smarterly instead of harderly. So what you can do is this. Remember how there's like 1,000 ways to do anything in Photoshop? One of the reasons that they have 1,000 ways and not just one is that different tools will interact differently with different settings. So let me show you what I mean. I will record an action. I will duplicate this layer and we'll duplicate current layer. Cool. Now, instead of just changing this mode to something else, I'm going to go into the layer styles. Remember, if you double click, you get the layer style. So now we've got nothing recorded yet because this is a dialog box. It's actually, I think they call it a modal, which means that it's a graphic interface box tied to another graphic interface command. Don't worry about that. Why am I dragging this everywhere? All right, anyway, you have the blend mode right here. Let me move this a little bit. So I can play around with all of these, right? And see if I like it. And it won't set it. You can even play with opacity. It won't set it until I press OK. Then it will set current layer with the opacity and the mode and the layer style sheet if I have any in the scale and all that good stuff. So I can goof around a little bit more and not worry about damaging anything. So that's a better way of handling things inside of layers. Stuff gets a little trickier though. If I duplicated this layer and I'm like, oh wait, so now that I've got this one duplicated, I'm going to actually drag it down below, and that's great. And now I'm going to go back to the layer above it, and I'm going to set it to linear dodge. There's a problem. Let me stop this. Notice that it has select layer background copy. That's not good. By selecting a specific name, notice that it has these double quotes. That actually means it's a string variable. I won't go into all of that, but what it means is this. Photoshop will look for something named background copy and try to select background copy. That may not be the case in the future. What if when you generate something, it calls it a copy of a background? Adobe could change anything. We never know for sure. What we need to do is to record it changing the layer based off of the layer we're on instead of changing the layer based on the name of the layer we're going to. What does that mean? It means this. Let me show you. Check this. We'll delete my current demo here. I'll just shift click to grab everything and drag it down to the trash can. Once I'm in, I will go ahead and press record again. Let me show you what this does. So duplicating it's fine because it recorded duplicate current layer. I could do that a bunch of times if I want, but let's say I want to get back to this layer. I do not want to click on it. Clicking on it will try to select something according to a name that may not exist later. Instead, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, that's Option on a Macintosh, and press the left bracket key. The left and right bracket key, when you hold down Alt, will allow you to select different layers. If you hold down Control, I'm going to hold down Control and press the closing bracket key, the right bracket key, it will move it up. Move current layer. See how great that is? So I'm going to hold down Control and go left bracket. I'm going to hold down Alt and go right bracket. I can move around, and it will do it based on where I am instead of based off of a specific name or location somewhere inside of it, which is wonderful because we don't want specific names on anything. Now, while we can navigate to different layers, we have to keep in mind that we have to be aware of this at all times. If we ever do a recorded step and we see that that step has something with quotes in it, you're going to want to figure out another way to do it. Now, you'll look at that and you go, for all of this trouble, is this really worth it? Yes, absolutely. Let's say you need to do a batch process. That is to say, let's say you need to do something on hundreds of files. You can record it, and then you can just do something like image size, and then set these so that it's 100 width, and tell it okay. And look at that. We have an image size in it. So we'll stop it, and we'll just say that it was a single image. Let me throw this away. It's just doing this. It's just an image size. Now, what you can do is under File, you have something called Automate, and you have Batch. What this allows you to do is to apply an action from an action set to an entire folder worth of files. So if I had 500 images that I needed to resize, I could simply press choose, locate that, and then choose a destination, for example, a folder, and then run it on everything. And this is how I usually use it. You can see, I won't go into too many details on batch processing because it's really straightforward. You simply set the action, set the action, choose your source, which in this case will be a folder, choose where it is. I frequently will override certain things like warnings. If you start getting those a lot, you just suppress the warnings. If you have open option dialogues, suppress those too. You do want to stop for errors so that you can find out what went wrong and fix it. Choose a folder, choose where that folder goes, wherever you want. And then sometimes I'll override the save as command. When this option's on, files will be saved to the destination folder only by save as steps in the action. If there are no save or save as steps, no files will be saved. So actually I meant to say that I don't override save action. I want to override it in actions, and by default it doesn't do that. That always confuses me. And then set the name, which will be the document's name, and you can choose any kind of thing. And then set the extension according to the document's extension, and then you can give it serial numbers if it will overwrite it, and then you tell it okay, and it will run that process, that image size, on any number of files, which is amazing. So that's really what I need to show you inside of Actions, because when we do contact sheets, it's essentially a batch processing for a very specific set of actions. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but first, as long as I'm in Actions, I'm going to show you a couple more little settings that are important to know about, and then I'll let you guys move back on with the rest of the project. So I'll see you in the next video.